Hello everyone, this is County Historian Larry Tippin. We have been doing a series on what we call the tiny towns and vanishing villages of Putnam County. In this session, I'd like to share with you what I know about the early founding and some of the early history of Manhattan. If I get ahead of you while we're reading some of the newspaper articles or studying the maps, you can pause the recording at any time by hitting this button, or if you'd like to go back and read something where I got too far ahead of it, you can left click and drag back this button to go to a previous slide. Manhattan was platted in 1829 by John Coleman Thomas Clark, as noted in the plat books at the county recorder's office at Greencastle. Not long after the National Road came through, which was in 1827, 1828. The first merchant there was said to be Wilson DeVore. Dr. Lennox Knight was the first practicing physician. It was said that had the first school taught by Mrs. Judge Clark. The first justice police place was Lord Harris, according to various histories of Putnam County. This is from the 1879 Atlas. You see the village of Manhattan. Come down south of Greencastle, what we commonly call Manhattan Road. The old National Road and Highway 40 went to Pleasant Garden, Rizla area. And the details from the 1864 map of Putnam County. The 1864 map is online available courtesy of the Library of Congress, and it has, in addition to the map of the county, some of the settlements and communities at that time. Where you see Manhattan along the Cumberland Road. See the public square, the hotel of I.S. Wright, the post office, Dr. Stone's office, school, various churches, and the people living there at the time. It appears the first tavern / inn was probably made of logs, may have been operated by Wilson DeVore, one of the early settlers. There was also an inn, maybe the same one, maybe a different one, Manhattan, owned and operated in the early days by Isaiah Wright, and later the Roberts family. That's the one we saw in the 1864 map. And the stagecoach, as it came through Manhattan, stopped at the tavern / inn. The passengers being offered food and drink, and if they needed to, a room to sleep if they so desired. One of the drivers was Mace Wright, whose son, Isom Mace Wright, married Mrs. Hutchison's dad's sister, Cynthia Hutchison. We'll talk about Mrs. Hutchison and her contributions. Mrs. Wright's grandfather was said to have been one of the stage drivers who conspired to dump President VanBuren in a mud hole in Plainfield. The grandfather Wright said the mud hole was under a large elm tree. Several men upset the coach, supposedly dramatized to VanBuren the sorry state of the roads. Later, the road came to be known as the VanBuren Elm. VanBuren vetoed a lot of construction projects, partly because of the widespread graft and corruption among the contractors, but this resulted in the roads not being built or improved as they should have been. So these men dramatized that for that purpose. And the VanBuren Elm is gone in Plainfield, but a nearby elementary school called VanBuren is there. Mrs. Hudson indicated her father told her that an old stagecoach driver named Wright had hanged himself from a tree, and the place had been marked by a pile of limestone rocks just north of Bob Lewis's barn, which had been about a mile north of Route 40 on the Manhattan-Greencastle Road. It has been said the stones were from the foundation of Wright's log cabin, and there had once been another log cabin a short way south of Bob Lewis's barn. This is a photo of the Manhattan Inn from the 1966 history. Very nice. According to local historian Mrs. Ruth Craft Hutchison, who is the lady we've been talking about, in a series of articles in the Greencastle Banner published in 1974, noted, in addition to what we've already discussed, some of the tavern owners drank too much of their own whiskey. One of the innkeepers apparently drank regularly and would crawl home. We had a board off the fence so he could get into the yard. Sometimes his wife followed behind him, giving him frequent whacks on his backside with a board. Once she took advantage of his sorry state and sewed him up in a sheet and variously gave him the whipping that he sorely deserved. She also noted that postage was collected from the recipient of a letter when the mail was delivered. It was said that one man who'd received the letter couldn't pay the postage, so the postmaster read the letter to him, told him what the message was. Mrs. Hutchinson also indicated that her grandmother Hutchinson told her that she remembered when the stagecoaches were running. When his coach got within a mile of Manhattan, the driver would blow a bugle so the community would be alerted to his arrival. Sometimes the mail even ran on Sundays. This was the regular mail route from Indianapolis to Terre Haute, which stopped in Manhattan on a regular basis. The local ministers were not pleased because when they heard the bugle during the time of services, the men would get up and go get their mail, often stayed and lingered playing cards to get caught up on the news. There was once a swamp north of the old National Road and west of the cemetery, which was said to be the cause of typhoid malaria. It seems people would cut ice from the swamp, which typically was shallow and dipped in the winter. It was not clean, and we did not know the dangers of germs that we do now. So many people got sick, apparently, from this swamp ice. And then after people became more knowledgeable about the cause of these diseases, the swamp was drained in the early 1900s. There's a newspaper article in the banner graphic, March 27, 1974. If you'd like to read about the swamp germs, what it caused, you can pause this and read it, or you can download this article from Hoosier Chronicles and read that, and a little bit more about Manhattan. Manhattan Post Office from the early days, beginning with 1830. If you'd like to pause and read who the postmasters were and their date of appointment, you can feel free to do so. The post office discontinued in 1903 after we started rural free delivery service. So you'd have the mail delivered right to your home, to your box, as opposed to having to go to the post office to get it. This is from one of the biographical sketches, the 1879 Atlas and History of Putnam County, which is the first compiled history of the county. Had various biographical sketches of the early settlers. And this was Mrs. Mildred Goes, if I'm pronouncing that right, maybe Goes, I'm not sure. Tragic story of her husband who joined the Army in 1864, was captured and sent to Andersonville. We know, of course, the suffering that occurred in Andersonville. Many that went there didn't survive. In April of 1865, he was exchanged, sent to hospital, Jefferson Barracks, where after months of illness he died and was buried there. But his bereaved wife, who arrived a week later, had his remains removed and brought back home, laid to rest in the Bethel graveyard. This is kind of an interesting, humorous article in the Greencastle Banner, 1858. William Daggy, who lives a mile south of Greencastle, had 2 horses removed from the stable. And then it believed that thieves were backed by the thieves about Manhattan. Basically, the story is that there had been a couple of young men who had been involved with a series of robberies who they believe were responsible for stealing those horses. If you want to read the whole story, of course, you can pause or go to the Hoosier Chronicles. It's very interesting to read the whole thing. Let's conclude our Manhattan story talking about Greenberry Molyneux. Not far from Manhattan, Greenberry Molyneux living with his young wife, Martha. He was about 25 years of age with a quick temper. Martha, a lovely lady several years younger than he, was the daughter of Manhattan's David Sublett, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. In the early morning hours of April 10, 1857, she was doing her usual household chores, excited that she was going to be baptized into the church that morning. Her husband then was vigorously opposed to her doing so. We returned to the house after his morning chores. They started an argument about this matter, which turned quite violent and ended in tragedy. Soon after the events occurred that morning, Greenberry Molnix was seen deliriously running from their house to the house of his father. Quite disturbed, several of the neighbors saw him doing so, went to the young couple's home, and witnessed what the newspapers of the day described as the most heart-rending scene ever recorded. Martha was found on the floor, barely alive, with the front of her skull bashed in with what appeared to be a heavy, blunt instrument. The local doctor was called. He determined that she was beyond hope, and she soon took her last painful breaths and died. Knowing the violent nature of her young husband's suspicion immediately fell upon him, and he was questioned by the authorities. He tried to claim that robbers must have entered his home while he was out doing the chores, but no one believed his wild story. Authorities felt that Molnix himself had caused this grave injustice, possibly more likely with a large iron shovel he'd recently had made, which was observed at the scene of the crime. One of the witnesses gave an account saying that he thought it might have been done by an axe, which only confused matters because it was clear that the wounds were a blunt instrument. He probably meant the blunt side of a single-blade axe, but he should have said so. Some people have misinterpreted this and said it was an axe murder, but it was not. It was a blunt force trauma injury of a very severe nature. Molnix was tried and convicted. The court then ordered the defendant to be returned to the county jail, which he was remained, until Friday, the 12th of November, at which he would be brought forth and hanged by his neck until dead. His father, Jonathan Molnix, went to Indianapolis in an attempt to get the governor to commute the sentence to life in prison, but he found the governor unwilling to have anything to do with the case. Mr. Molnix then, the father, went in search of an attorney to hopefully help in this matter. He ran into the notorious attorney Tom Walpole and his partner, Roberts, who, knowing the governor's weak point, were able to get him under the influence of intoxicating liquor. In order to appear to justify the $500 fee that they had taken from Molnix, Walpole was able to get the governor to commute the sentence for 1 month, but not to life in prison. Ordered him to be hanged December the 18th, at which day he was brought forth to the gallows, which had been prepared for the execution. After declaring his innocence, Sheriff Farrow tied his hands behind his back and placed a rope around his neck. Molnix, in a jovial and unconcerned manner, said, "Bill, this is rather tight," which evoked a round of laughter. The sheriff then pulled the lever and sent the prisoner to eternity, at which time the rope broke. Molnix fell to the ground with dangling rope still around his neck. After taking 2 or 3 steps, making an unnatural sound, was hoisted back up with the rope being more securely fastened. He was then hung for a total of 33 minutes, at which time he was declared dead, ending one of the most memorable and yet tragic chapters in the county's history. I hope you've enjoyed listening to a little bit about the early history and founding of Manhattan. I hope you return when we talk about some more.